Thank you. LAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recommend the committee and the legislature reject parts of these proposals, and the pieces of the proposal specifically related to long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals, the governor's long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals, and the proposal related to the short-lived climate pollutant strategy. And the reason is that we think that these activities and the justification for these activities do not appear to be consistent with current statutory direction. The governor's more stringent 2030 and 2050 GHG goals are identified as justifications for parts of these requests. And although the legislature has adopted policies intended to achieve more aggressive greenhouse gas goals, such as RPS and doubling the energy efficiency standards, we're not aware of any statutory direction for ARB to develop regulations to achieve more stringent post-2020 goals, and that's one of the justifications for some of these resources. In addition, related to the short-lived climate pollution strategy, existing legislation directs the ARB to develop a strategy to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, but it does not direct the administration to implement the measures contained in the strategy, and thus we think the proposal is premature given the current statutory direction. With respect to the funding source, we recommend for the piece of these proposals that is related strictly to non-GHG pollution reductions, criteria pollutants and toxic pollutants. It's unclear to us whether the cost of implementation account is an appropriate fund source for those specific types of activities that aren't specifically related to greenhouse gas reduction, since that fund comes from a fee paid by greenhouse gas emitters. And so we recommend the committee and the legislature look for an alternative funding source and direct the administration to identify an alternative funding source for those activities specifically related to other types of pollutants that are non-GHG pollutants.
Thank you. Ms. Chang, did you want to respond to any of LAO's comments?
I don't think so. I think I covered it in the initial comments. Thank you.
We have a recommendation of hold open on issue number 3, so we'll do that. And let's move on to issue number 4. Oh, public comment. All right, we can take public comment one issue at a time. That's fine.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that a coalition, I'm here for Western United Dairymen, but a coalition of organizations opposes funding a regulatory program for methane emissions when the legislature hasn't given that authority. We have 3 branches of government. One of them is the legislature, and agencies can only regulate when they're given the direction and authority to do so by the legislature. Mr. Lara has a bill that contemplates giving that authority to ARB. It's in the first house. It's got, I would say, some real challenges, and we would suggest that we don't oppose the other components, but we think LAO's analysis was spot on, and if it did get funded, it would be ripe for litigation, because I think LAO said it as clearly as possible that you can't fund something when there's no authority to do it. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bill McGavern with the Coalition for Clean Air. We support ARB's budget request to address the short-lived climate pollutants. It's vital that we get these pollutants under control, and ARB does actually have existing authority to do that. We worked a lot on SB 605 2 years ago. The reason why it doesn't give ARB additional authority is because ARB already had that authority to address these pollutants. And it's also important to note that increasingly it's essential that ARB address both climate pollution and air pollution, because they mostly come from the same sources. So I know we have separate pots of money and in some cases different statutory authority, but there also is statutory authority for ARB to do both of these. So the fact that they are actually integrating the planning processes is a good thing and something this legislature should be supporting.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Moffitt on behalf of the Milk Producers Council and also Waste Management, in opposition for many of the reasons outlined by Mr. Manning. Specific to organics diversion, we agree with the issue raised by the LAO and the authority of ARB on this issue. In fact, for organics diversion, this legislature a little more than 2 years ago passed a bill giving the responsibility to CalRecycle for increasing organics diversion and addressing those issues. And so we agree with the LAO's analysis about statutory authority at ARB, and in fact think with respect to organics it actually rests at CalRecycle. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we'll be holding that item open, and let's proceed with issue number 4.
All right. Issue 4, this budget request would support requirements in AB 692 to decarbonize the fuels that are used in the state's vehicle fleet. The LAO has noted that DGS has already identified a likely supplier for the fuel needed to meet the 2017 purchasing requirement. Although this is true for 2017, it's important to look at multiple fuel suppliers in the longer term, especially as the percentage of low-carbon fuel increases in future years, to ensure the best outcome for the state in terms of both cost and environmental benefits. In addition, DGS has already asked ARB to provide information to fleet managers, provide technical support with greenhouse gas calculations, and to respond to questions regarding compatibility and infrastructure requirements. We expect these requests will continue and, in fact, will grow in the future. In addition, although we have been implementing the low carbon fuel standard for several years and we do approve carbon intensity pathways every year, AB 692 is expected to increase the demand for low carbon fuels in the state consumed by state agencies, and also increase the profile of the low carbon fuel standard and this type of purchasing requirement as a way that jurisdictions can contribute to the climate change fight. So this could induce new producers and technologies to enter the market, requiring ARB to process even greater number of new fuel pathways. Thank you.
LAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recommend rejecting this proposal to implement AB 692 because we feel that there's insufficient workload justification at this time. In the short run, the additional workload to implement this bill appears to be relatively minor and absorbable. As Ms. Chang mentioned, the board has been implementing the LCFS for several years and improving carbon intensities. And based on our conversations with DGS, it appears that they've already identified a likely fuel source for the coming year. In the long run, there could be additional workload associated with implementing this bill, and additional workload for ARB related to the LCFS. However, the additional workload is uncertain at this time, and therefore the request for additional resources at this time we feel is premature.
Thank you. Is there any public comment? The staff recommendation agrees with LAO to...
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Christine Casey, Department of Finance.
My apologies. You've been quiet so far.
Finance supports the governor's budget. We believe that the workload related to this proposal justifies the need for the requested resources.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. We do have a staff recommendation to reject. There's only one of us here, so we'll hold off voting on that until later. Thank you all, and then let's move on to issue number 5.
Okay. ARB is requesting 3 positions to implement the requirements of SB 350. One of these positions is for ARB to study the barriers that low-income communities face in accessing zero and near-zero emission transportation options and to make recommendations to overcome these barriers. SB 350 requires ARB to conduct a study on these topics by January 1st, 2017. In order to meet the broad goals of the legislation, this study will need to be conducted over multiple years and updated as new information comes to light. And there are 3 reasons why this work requires an ongoing effort. First of all, the amount of research and analysis that can be conducted prior to January 1st of 2017 is extremely limited. We've diverted resources and delayed other workload to begin working with stakeholders to assess community needs in different areas of the state, accessibility, convenience, reliability, affordability, the need for education and outreach, and the need for additional public investments. Based on the work that we've done so far, we don't believe that we can cover all of these topics in sufficient depth within the rest of this year. Second, while we have an idea of the barriers and solutions in the current landscape, we have many incentive programs focused on disadvantaged communities that are starting in this fiscal year and subsequent years that will provide critical information to help us understand the challenge. And third, access to zero-emission transportation is a relatively new area of research and policymaking. We expect market dynamics to evolve over time, and we think it is important to update our work as some barriers are addressed and the dynamics shift. In summary, to meet the broad goals outlined in the legislation requires ongoing effort and a permanent position to do the kind of in-depth analysis that we think we need to do to identify the real problems and viable solutions, and then to be able to update that analysis over time as we learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. LAO?
Thank you. Again, your agenda summarizes our recommendations and comments on this issue. We recommend the legislature convert the one position that Ms. Chang was talking about from a permanent position to a one-year, one-time position. We don't have any issues with the rest of this request, but for this issue in particular, the workload is associated with a study barriers to zero-emission vehicles in low-income communities, and in the legislation, it requires that study to be completed by January 1st, 2017, and so we don't feel like it's appropriate to provide ongoing resources when the legislature has directed ARB to complete the study on a one-time basis. So we recommend converting it to one-time funding.
Thank you. And the dollar amount for that one position is $162,000.
That's correct.
That's the staff recommendation. Did Department of Finance want to weigh in?
Ellen Moradi, Department of Finance, would just like to echo the statement that Ms. Chang put forward, that the position would be used for ongoing analysis and refinement, and also add that the difficulties that departments face in trying to fill a one-year limited term position can be very challenging.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on that item? Again, we have a staff recommendation that's different from the proposal. We will hold on to that till we have a fuller complement of members on the dais. Issue number 6.
So my colleague Kirk Harparis will be joining me for this issue.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Along with Ms. Chang, I'm a Deputy Executive Officer of the California Air Resources Board, and I'm responsible for air quality planning and coordinating with the South Coast Air District on their programs. The issue is the performance of the South Coast Air District's reclaim program. Last year, the South Coast Board, in an attempt to induce more efficient controls on stationary sources within their basin, lowered the number of emission reduction credits in that program. Reclaim is a market program where the largest sources of NOx, as part of their overall compliance strategy, are able to trade emission reduction credits with other entities within that program. As it does govern the largest sources of NOx within the basin, and as such, the performance of that program is critical to the region's attainment of federal and state air quality standards. In reducing the number of credits in the program last year, the district board reduced the credits to a smaller degree, to a smaller amount than had been proposed in the district staff report. And that raised the question as to whether or not the program would be stringent enough to induce the sort of controls that are needed for that. Because it's so important to attainment of air quality standards in the region, ARB staff are doing an independent analysis of the program to determine if it is doing two things. The first is meeting the minimum requirements of state law in terms of the control efficiencies required of the sources within that program, and two, whether or not the emission reductions from the program are large enough and would occur soon enough in order to meet federal air quality standards. To the first question, we've done an in-depth review of the district staff's analysis of the technologies that are available to reduce emissions from those sectors, and we believe that the district staff report is thorough and has identified the appropriate technologies. So that leads us to the second question that we're now investigating, and that is whether or not the credit level within the market is low enough to induce the sort of behavior and installation of the necessary controls. To do that, we're looking at the historical performance of the program, in terms of the number of credits, the emission reductions that it's achieved, and the technologies that have been installed. And we'll be completing that review over the next couple of months. The second issue, as I pointed out, was whether or not the reductions from the program are sufficient to meet federal air quality standards and deadlines. And I would note for that the district staff last week reduced a set of control strategies that they would be developing and proposing for their next air quality plan. And as part of that package, they included a program, they included a measure for further tightening of the reclaim program. So we are now reviewing that measure and talking with the district staff about how that would work with their current rule in order to achieve the necessary reductions for to meet federal standards.
And what is the time frame for that review?
We will be doing those reviews in parallel and then be working with the district staff and US EPA to ensure that we can move an approvable SIP and an approvable rule on to the federal agency for their action in the near future.
Do you expect to be able to report on that at the same time as the other report in a couple of months?
That we're doing those analyses in parallel, so over the next several months.
Great. Then we'll look forward to seeing you again before the end of this budget cycle and updating us on those outcomes.
Thank you.
Findings. Okay. All right. Was there any public testimony on that item? Issue number 6, which is informational only. Seeing none, my understanding is we can take issues 7, 8, and 9 collectively. If you'd like to just move through each of them.
Sure. Let me just quickly summarize. Issue 7 is a spring finance letter for a sustainable freight action plan. This is ARB's request for resources to implement the sustainable freight action plan, which is called for by Governor Brown's Executive Order B 3215. This plan will help reduce freight-related emissions to reduce negative health impacts and help meet climate and air quality goals. So these resources are needed to develop and implement sustainable freight measures, work on pilot projects within the state's primary trade corridors, certify new engines and technologies, and address economic data gathering and modeling. Let me move to issue 8. Issue 8 on the agenda concerns support for enhanced testing and enforcement that is arising as a result of the Volkswagen case that everybody's probably very familiar with. We're requesting resources to prosecute the Volkswagen case as well as to prosecute other cases that have been put on hold to accommodate the VW investigation workload. Our investigation into other original equipment manufacturers requires additional testing based on lessons that we've learned regarding how the VW defeat device was discovered. We also need to acquire additional documentation on these other vehicles and potentially prepare legal cases depending on what we find. These resources are needed on an ongoing basis to conduct additional vehicle screening and investigations. We are continuing to develop new testing procedures to identify and diagnose in-use emission issues. We've also asked for some legal resources in this request, and they are also needed on an ongoing basis. The scope of this investigation is larger than any investigation that we've done, and in fact, it's larger than any investigation that the federal government has done on vehicles as well. Based on our experience with other much simpler cases that we've done, we know that there will be legal activity on this case for years out into the future, in at least 3 years. And then the last item, issue 9, is enhanced fleet modernization program augmentation. We're requesting a one-time increase of $4.6 million from the enhanced fleet modernization sub-account. And this is to provide additional support for the enhanced fleet modernization program's retire and replace element. This is a timely funding shift because there were amendments made in 2014. They temporarily reduced participation in the retirement-only aspect of the program, creating a one-time surplus. And because of this, we've had such strong interest in the retire and replace program, and it's a good opportunity to shift the funds to a program that's been very popular and is highly oversubscribed.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, I understand you have a comment on issue 8.
Yeah, issue number 8, the Volkswagen litigation resources. Just for context, the entire request is $3.2 million for the budget year, and then on an ongoing basis, $2.2 million. And our recommendation is to convert $1.2 million of the ongoing amount funding which is for 2 legal positions as well as $1 million in contracting funds for data collection and management services related to the litigation, convert that from permanent to 2-year limited term. The timelines for the litigation and sort of when they will be complete is unclear at this time, and we think by authorizing them on a permanent basis, the legislature will, or excuse me, on a limited term basis, the legislature will have an opportunity a couple of years down the line to reassess the ongoing need for those resources. And we don't have any issues with the remainder of the requests related to the compliance and enforcement activities, just the legal piece of it.
Thank you. And in this case, the staff recommendation is to approve the administration's proposal, and I imagine that Department of Finance agrees with the administration's proposal.
We do concur with the staff's recommendation, and also note that litigation is very likely to go well beyond 2 years, and permanent resources would be best.
And may I just add, so the $1 million in contract funds is for, as the LAO mentioned, a document management system that we've worked with the Attorney Generals on, identifying a vendor. There was actually, my understanding is, a competitive bid to pick that vendor. It's up to $1 million. It depends on how many documents we stock into the system. But this is a really, really critical part of the legal case in terms of being able to access the documents easily. There's also going to be, in addition to the enforcement cases that we are undertaking, there's also, as you know, a lot of civil cases that are going on. Because we have all of the documents, we have to be able to access those to be able to provide those into those cases. So knowing that we're going to have the ability to access those over the whole term of the legal cases, I think is really critical.
Certainly the litigation might go on for 2 years or more, but it's within the realm of possibilities that the litigation might be resolved via a mediation process or a settlement of some sort. If that were to happen, then what happens to these positions?
With regard to well, I guess, I actually talked to the chief counsel before I came over here today, and I asked her, I said, this is the issue that's coming up, but I know that there's activity. I don't know any of the details. And, based on your experience, she's the one who defended California in the Pavley case that went on for many, many years. Based on your experience with us, what do you think is going to, do you think that this really could get resolved quickly? And she says, there are so many different aspects to it and so many different vehicles. The scope is very large. So there are engines of different sizes. There are issues associated with vehicles that are already out on the street, vehicles that have not been sold, the intentional nature of this, based on her experience, she thinks it's extremely unlikely that it's resolved in something like a year or even 2 years.
And I would think that any resolution would largely be based upon the information that is gathered through the investigation and the gathering and compiling of the documents that you're talking about. So that makes sense to me. We have, looks like a couple of members of the public who'd like to speak. Mr. McGavern, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I promise this will be the last time I address you today. Just briefly.
Even though I'm not allowed to, I'll hold you to that.
In speaking in support, Bill McGavern with the Coalition for Clean Air, speaking in support of these budget requests and your staff recommendation to approve them. First of all, the Freight Action Plan is vital to decreasing emissions from the goods movement sector that are both damaging air quality, and that's particularly concentrated in low-income communities of color that are downwind from freight facilities like ports and rail yards and freeways, and also an important way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Volkswagen case shows how important it is that we enforce laws on vehicles in use, not just as they are tested in the laboratory. So it's important to have the resources to do that. And then finally, Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program has been very successful, helping low-income people in the most polluted air districts to get into cleaner and more reliable transportation. Thanks.
Chair, members, I'm Tom Knox of Valley Clean Air Now. I'm here to echo Bill's comments on the Volkswagen case, and then for EFMP Plus Up, which we manage in the San Joaquin Valley. It's a great program. It's doing a lot of good for low-income drivers in disadvantaged communities, and the money certainly is needed and could be well used. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a recommendation to approve on issues 7, 8, and 9. Again, we'll hold off on that for a few moments, and thank you for being here. We'll proceed now with the California Energy Commission.